Welcome to Coolest Prison Escapes. First, I'm going to tell you about Alcatraz. The island was originally founded in 1775 by Spanish explorer Juan Manuel de Ala. 75 years later, the president at the time, who was Millard Fillmore, issued it over to the military. They used it as a fortress to protect the San Francisco Bay. The army there installed 100 cannons around the island. In the late 1850s, the military held prisoners on Alcatraz. People who were held there were usually accused of treason during the American Civil War. And during the American-Spanish War, they held a few Native Americans. It was deemed a perfect prison, meaning that no one could escape it. During the early 20th century, inmates did a lot of labor. They built new buildings, they built a hospital, and they built a 600-cell building that still stands today. The construction ended in 1912 and was officially the world's largest reinforced concrete building.
Each cell was fitted with unbreakable steel gates, which had no keys, but could be opened remotely. Alcatraz was the biggest concrete structure in the world, and supposedly the most secure prison on the planet.
Alcatraz finally became a federal prison in 1934. It underwent more construction to make it a high-security prison. It opened officially on July 31st, 1934. The purpose was to keep the prisoners that were too dangerous for regular prisons, so that they could never escape. But it seemed like it didn't work. Supposedly, 3 men escaped in June of 1962. The first inmate was named John Anglin. Him and his brother began robbing banks in the 1950s, and they were both arrested in 1956. They served at a few prisons before Alcatraz with some failed escape attempts. The last inmate was named Frank Morris. Frank Morris had been arrested many times in his teens for the possession of narcotics and armed robbery. He met the Anglin brothers while he was serving time at Atlanta Penitentiary. On January 3, 1960, he arrived at Alcatraz to serve a sentence of 14 years. It was there that they planned this devious escape. Here's how the escape went down. Lights out, female dog. Okay, good night. If you didn't catch that, I'll explain. The 3 inmates used paper mache to make heads that replicate themselves, and they stuffed it in their beds to make it look like they were still there. All of them escaped through an unused sewer pipe. Once they finally got to the beach, they rowed away on a makeshift raft. Many say they lived, but many say they died in the storm. The police presume them to be dead, but who knows, they could still be out there. What do you guys think? Now, let's move over to one of Canada's most famous jails, Kingston Penitentiary. Kingston Penitentiary was constructed in 1833 to 34. It opened on June 1st, 1835, as the provincial penitentiary of the province of Upper Canada. Kingston Penitentiary held some very famous inmates, including Clifford Olson. In 1982, he was known as the Beast of British Columbia. He was sent to Kingston after being convicted of killing 11 children that he raped, stabbed, and strangled. Or Edwin Boyd, the Toronto bank robber and folk hero. He was sentenced to life in prison at the jail. Mr. Boyd has a gang of bandits and is famous for his heists and 2 escapes from the Don jail. His story inspires the 2011 movie Citizen Gangster. Another man named Mohammed Shafia, an Afghan-Canadian businessman, was convicted along with his son and second wife of first-degree murder for drowning his 3 teenage daughters and his first wife in June 2009 near Kingston. And let me tell you about one of Kingston's most famous escapes. A bank robber named Tyrone William Kahn, known as Ty Kahn, he had already escaped from 3 other prisons. Ty Kahn was born in 1967 as Ernest Bruce Haves. Since his real mother was only 15 years old, he was given up for adoption right after birth. He was adopted by an Ontario psychiatrist, Dr. E. Burt Kahn, and his mentally unstable wife. Dr. Kahn was abusive, and after 8 years, he returned to the Children's Aid Society and spent adolescent years passed around foster homes and youth detention facilities. Kahn developed a habit of compulsive stealing, and gradually his habit worsened. By his late teens, he was stealing cars. He only spent a total of 69 days legally at large from birth to his death. After some little crime and low-level detention center escapes, he turned to bank robbing. He was serving more than 47 years in prison, mostly for bank robbery. Now let me tell you about the escape. This is how it went down. Basically, if you missed that, Tyrone William Kahn, he built a grappling hook and a ladder. He constructed the grappling hook and the ladder from the prison shop. He took the grappling hook and the ladder and he got over Kingston Penitentiary's 10-meter perimeter fence one night in 1999. And his escape was not discovered until morning. He used cayenne pepper to get the dogs off his tail as well. He was on the run for a couple weeks, staying in a friend's basement in Toronto. On May 20th, 1999, armed police surrounded the home, ready to take him down. Kahn, armed with a sawed-off shotgun, shot himself, though there are theories that it was an accident. Now, let's move on to our last and probably most cool story of them all.
Frank Abagnale, Catch Me If You Can. Frank Abagnale, born April 27, 1948, in Bronxville, New York, the United States. When he was 16 years old, his parents divorced and he ran away from home. He began to write fake checks and cash them in. He passed himself off as an airplane pilot with Pan Am Air Company and flew over 1 million miles from the ages of 15 to 21. He had up to 8 identities. He was finally captured in France in 1969 and served 6 months in a French prison and 6 more in Sweden before finally being deported to the United States, where he was then sentenced to an additional 12 years in the federal pen. He was convicted for only 8 charges out of his 800 possible charges, all having to do with fraudulence and identity impersonation. When the airplane landed in the U.S., He escaped through a toilet hatch and was caught in Montreal, Canada. He later served in an Atlanta prison. When he was being transported to the prison, the marshal had forgotten his prison papers. Abagnale seized the opportunity and persuaded the guards that he was actually an undercover prison inspector. Authorities at the time used the ploy to test their jails, and the guards totally took the bait.
Ah, hello, welcome. You must be the undercover prison inspector. I'm a main guard here. I'm guard Joe. As you can see, it's a pretty chillax prison up in here. We got our basic guards and our basic everything. Oh, well, thank you very much for your hospitality, guard Joe. Hey, no problem. Yeah, so if you just follow me over here, I'll show you to your room in a second. Don't you mean cell? You're right, yeah, cell. As you can see here, we gave you the biggest room with the biggest bed with a TV, and we gave you a PlayStation 4 you can play whenever you want. Plus, we gave you these complimentary LeBron 12s. So there you go, and I really hope you enjoy your stay here as prison inspector.
Abagnale writes that he was treated much better in prison than other inmates thanks to his undercover status. But the ploy paid off a lot better once he called his friend, who he convinced to help him escape prison. His friend printed out a fake FBI ID card and a fake undercover prison inspector ID card, where she then called the prison, told them she would be coming in for a visit, and her and Frank convinced the guards that they had to leave the prison together immediately. They just walked out the prison doors, and the guards later realized that Frank was not an undercover prison inspector. Frank probably had a good laugh about that. Frank Abagnale is one of history's greatest con men. Even though he escaped that prison, he was caught a few days later. Abagnale was paroled after 5 years on the condition he'd help federal authorities uncover checks that have been forged. He still works for the FBI today and is a legitimate multimillionaire. Or is he? With his fraudulence informants / information business. He has a wife and 3 very successful sons.
Walking up 42nd Street one afternoon about 5 o'clock in the evening, 16 years old, pondering all of these things, when I started to approach the front door of an old hotel that used to be there called the Commodore Hotel, now the Grand Hyatt. Just as I was about to get to the front door of the hotel, out stepped an Eastern Airline flight crew onto the sidewalk. Couldn't help but notice the captain, the co-pilot, the flight engineer, about 3 or 4 flight attendants dragging their bags to the curb to load them in the van to take them to the airport. As they loaded the van, I thought to myself, that's it. If I could pose as a pilot, I could travel all over the world for free. I probably could get just about anybody, anywhere to cash a check for me. So I walked up the street a little further to 42nd and Park. I went to cross over. I heard a huge helicopter. So I looked up, and there was New York Airways landing on the roof of the Pan Am building. Pan Am, the nation's flag carrier, the airline that flew around the world. I thought, what a perfect airline to use. So the next day, I placed a phone call to the executive corporate offices of Pan Am. When the switchboard was ringing, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to say. When they answered, Pan American Airlines, can I help you? Yes, ma'am. I'd like to speak to somebody in the purchasing department. Purchasing? One moment. And the clerk came on and said, yes, sir, maybe you can help me. My name is John Black. I'm a co-pilot with the company based out of San Francisco. Been with the company about 7 years. Never had anything like this come up before. What's the problem? Well, we flew a trip in here yesterday. We're going out today. Yesterday, I sent my uniform out through the hotel to have it dry cleaned. Now the hotel and the cleaner say they can't find it. Here I am with a flight in about 4 hours, no uniform. Don't you have a spare uniform? Certainly, back home in San Francisco, but I never get it here in time for my flight. Well, hold on, I'll be right back. He came back and said, my supervisor said, you need to go down to the Well-Built Uniform Company on 5th Avenue. They're our supplier. I'll call them and let them know you're on the way. Well, that's exactly what I wanted to know, so I went down to the Well-Built Uniform Company. Little fella, Mr. Rosen, fitted me out in the uniform. Back then they were black gabardine, the 3 gold stripes on the arm, the gray hair. I certainly looked old enough to be the pilot. When it was all done, I said, "How much do I owe you?" "Well, the uniform's $286. I said, "No problem, I'll write you a check." "No, we can't take any checks." "Oh, well then I'll just pay you cash." No, we can't accept cash. You need to fill out this computer card. Then in these boxes, put your employee number, and we bill this back under uniform allowance. Comes out of your next Pan Am paycheck. Well, that's even better. Go ahead and do that. New York had two airports, LaGuardia and Kennedy. LaGuardia was 20 minutes from downtown. Kennedy was about 50, so naturally LaGuardia being the closer of the two, that's where I went. Spent most of the morning walking around LaGuardia in the uniform, trying to figure out, now that I had the uniform, how the hell do you get on these planes? Well, I got a little hungry about lunchtime, so I walked in the luncheonette, sat down at the counter on the stool, and ordered a sandwich. Moments later, a TWA crew walked in. Flight attendant sat in the booth, but the pilot sat at the counter on either side of me, captain right next to me. Now, back before deregulation of the airlines, airline people thought of themselves as just one big family. They didn't hesitate a moment to talk to each other, and the captain kind of leaned over. "Young man, how's Pan Am doing?" "Doing just fine, Captain." "Tell me, what's Pan Am doing out here at LaGuardia?" "Pan Am doesn't fly into LaGuardia, they only go into Kennedy." Well, I picked up on that right away. Yeah, we came into Kennedy, had a short layover, came over to visit some friends of mine. Matter of fact, I'm on my way back to Kennedy now. So tell me, young man, what type of equipment are you on? Now, airline people have a lot of jargon for things, and one of them is they never call a plane or an aircraft. They call it equipment, and what type of equipment you're on meant what type of plane do you fly? Back then, a DC-8, a 707. Of course, I didn't know that, and I thought, what type of equipment am I on? The equipment I'm on is this stool. They must mean what type of equipment is on the planes I fly. So I thought, well, they've got the wings, they got the engine. They always had a sticker on the engine, who manufactured the engine. So I said, yes, General Electric. All three pilots kind of just stopped eating and leaned over. Captain said, oh, really? What do you fly, washing machines? So I knew I said the wrong thing. Out the door I went. Everybody had an airline ID card, plastic, laminated card, much like a state driver's license today, yet without the ID card, the uniform was worthless. Went back to Manhattan pretty discouraged, thinking, where would I come up with a Pan American airline corporate ID? I was sitting in the hotel room. I noticed the big, thick Manhattan yellow pages on the dresser. I pulled them down on the bed, flipped them open, looked under the word identification. There were 3 or 4 pages of companies who made convention badges, metal badges, plastic badges, police badges. Started to call around, and finally one company said, listen, most of those airline IDs manufactured by Polaroid, 3M company. Need to call one of them. Finally got the 3M company on the phone in Manhattan. Yeah, we manufacture Pan Am's identification system, along with a number of other carriers. How come? So I tell you, I'm a purchasing officer for a major U.S. carrier. I'm in New York just for the day. We're getting ready to expand our routes, hire a lot of new employees, go to a formal ID. We're very impressed with the Pan Am format. Wondered if I came by your office this afternoon briefly, we could discuss quantity and price. By all means, come on by. So I went by dressed in the suit, and the sales rep opened the book. Yeah, we do United, Delta, Eastern, Pan Am. Pan Am. We like that Pan Am format. Wonder if you might have a sample I could bring back. Sure, I'll be right back. And he brought me back a 5x7 glossy piece of paper with a picture of an ID card blown up in the middle of it. Someone else's picture in the picture. John Doe for a name. And in bold red ink across the front, this is a sample only. I said, no, I'm afraid this won't do. You know, I need to bring back an actual physical card. And by the way, what is all this equipment on the floor? Oh, no, we don't just sell this card. We sell the system, camera, laminator. I say, we have to buy all this? Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, since we have to buy it all, why don't you just demonstrate how it works and use me? Fine, have a seat right here. Took my picture, made up the card. And I was going down the elevator studying the card, had a blue border across the top, about 1/4 of an inch in Pan Am's color blue, but not a single thing on the card said Pan Am. No logo, no insignia, no company name. This was a plastic card, like a credit card. You couldn't type on it, couldn't write on it, couldn't print on it. Discouraged, I put it in my pocket, headed back to the hotel. As I was walking back, I noticed I'd passed a hobby shop, so I turned around and walked back. Excuse me, sir, I see you sell a lot of models here. You sell models of commercial jetliners? Sure, over there. And I bought a model of a Pan Am 707 cargo jet for about $2.40. Took it back to my room, opened the box, threw all the parts out, but there at the bottom of the box was a sheet of decals that went on the model. And when you soaked them in a glass of water, the little Pan Am logo, the blue globe that would have went on the tail of the plastic plane, went perfect up at the top of the plastic card. And the word Pan Am and the special styling of graphics that would have went on the fuselage went perfect across the top of the card. And then clear decal on the laminated plastic made a beautiful identification card. Pan Am says they estimate that between the ages of 16 and 18, I flew more than 1 million miles for free, boarded more than 250 commercial aircraft in more than 26 countries around the world. Pan Am says, keep in mind that though Frank Abagnale did in fact pose as one of our pilots, he never once stepped on board one of our aircraft. That's true. I never flew on Pan Am because I was afraid someone might say to me, you know, I'm based in San Francisco, I've been out there about 21 years. I don't recall ever meeting you before. Or someone might say, you know, your ID card is not exactly like my ID card. So instead, I flew on everyone else. If I wanted to go somewhere, I literally just walked out to the airport and looked on the board, United Flight 800 to Chicago. Then I went downstairs to the door marked United Operations and walked in. The operations clerk, hey, Pan Am, what can we do for you? I was wondering if the jump seat's open on 800, I need a deadhead to Chicago. Jump seat? It's open this evening. I'd like to get a pink slip pass. And I'd give him my ID, he'd write me out a pass. I'd walk out, hand it to the flight attendant. She'd open the door to the cockpit, and I'd step in. They had a captain, a co-pilot, a flight engineer, and a seat behind the captain called the jump seat, where pilots deadhead on company time. Now, because pilots love to talk shop, once you picked up that jargon, it was the same conversation over and over and over. So I just step on board, even Jim, Bob Davis, we arrive in Chicago. On the taxi out, always the same questions. So Bob, how long you been with Pan Am? Been flying about 7 years. What position you fly? A right seat, which was airline terminology for a co-pilot. What type of equipment are you on? Had that one down perfect. Matter of fact, whatever they flew, I didn't fly. So I had no problems with that. I'd arrive in Chicago, I'd go by the Pan Am ticket counter, but just enough to get the attention of the passenger service rep. So can I help you? Excuse me, where do we lay over here? Had to deadhead a trip if somebody got ill, never laid over in Chicago. I guess, sir, we use a Parma House Hilton downtown, catch a crew bus lower level door 3 out. I'd go down the Parma House Hilton, walk in, and on the corner of the registration desk was a little sign that said, Airline Cruise. That was a 3-ring binder. You signed in, referenced your flight number, showed your ID. They'd give me a key. I'd stay 2 or 3 days, and Pan Am would be direct billed from my room and my meals. I also could cash a personal check at the front desk up to $100 because I was an employee of the airline. The airline had a contract with the hotel, and they'd cash your check. But then I found out that every airline honors every other airline employee's personal check. A reciprocal agreement still practiced today in 2011. So at the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, a Delta flight attendant can walk up to an American ticket counter, show her Delta ID, and cash a personal check up to $100, and vice versa. Of course, when I found that out, I'd go out to JFK or LAX, only I'd go to everybody, Northeast, National, KLM, Air France. It would take me a good 8 hours, stopping at every counter and every building. By the time I got all the way around the other end of the airport, at least 8 hours had gone by. And what do you have in 8 hours? Shift change, new people, so I'd go all the way back around the other way again. I made a great deal of money. The only reason I quit at 18 is the FBI issued a John Doe warrant for interstate transportation of fraudulent checks, a federal offense. The John Doe warrant meant the FBI didn't know my identity. In the warrant, the FBI said, based on interviews with people I had contact with, I was approximately 30 years old. I was 18, had a great deal of money, so I hung the uniform up and moved to Atlanta, Georgia.